All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. You can hit the like and subscribe button on whatever platform you're watching us on. I am happy to be joined today by someone who you may have seen in recent weeks because he's been quite outspoken on a number of different platforms. Chef Andrew Gruel is with us. You can follow him on Twitter at Chef Gruel and go to chefgruel.com to learn more about his work and his restaurants. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Definitely an honor.
So I want to talk to you about a bunch of things, but before we do, maybe tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up in the restaurant industry in the first place.
Yeah, that's a question I ask myself every morning I wake up. I didn't plan to be in the restaurant industry. Like many people, it was my first job growing up, washing dishes, 13, 14. I grew up in Jersey, and I actually did go to a small liberal arts college up in Maine, studying something completely outside of the restaurant field. But while I was in college, I continued working in the restaurant industry. Specifically, I was working at a lobster house and also helping out in the lobster industry up there in Maine. And it was about 2 years in that I realized, wait a minute, here's this eureka moment where this is what I want to do. So I left college, traveled around the United States, working for a ton of different chefs, ultimately went back to school to get my food service marketing degree, as well as my culinary arts degree. So, got that piece of paper and just, worked my way around the United States and ultimately landed in Southern California. Always had a love for seafood, started a nonprofit out here focusing on sustainable seafood. And then I let that parlay into an actual business idea. Couldn't raise any capital for it at all. So I just borrowed as much money as I could, bootstrapped myself, borrowed a food truck for a week and launched the business model as a food truck, went from 1 to 4 food trucks over an 8-month period. And now 9 years later, we've got 28 restaurants nationwide.
You're how old?
I am 40 years old.
So you have been part of this. I'm just a couple of years younger than you. You've been part of this whole sort of older millennial entrepreneurial thing, which means that when you were coming up, you kind of hit your stride in terms of entrepreneurialism at exactly the moment when all the money dried up and there wasn't anything available.
Great call.
Yeah, exactly. But it also, I mean, that was a really challenging time. I remember it as one myself. This had to be just such a risk-taking maneuver for you to bet on yourself, to believe that you were going to be able to have something that was sustainable here in an economy that really was not offering up anything of the kind of loans that existed in like the mid-90s and the like.
Yeah, well, what's really interesting now that you bring that up is that I recall in like the mid 2000s when things were a lot stronger, everyone had come to me and said, "Hey, why don't you open a restaurant now?" Right. So at that point, I'd been in about 10 years, but I'd really busted my butt. 10 years of 90-hour weeks, right, every week, and I said, no, I'm going to wait. So you're exactly right. I mean, in 2011, it was laughable to try and start any sort of a restaurant industry or anything in the retail world, really in the midst of a recession. So it was about, okay, let me use this opportunity. I saw the need in the market. I really did. And I just, you got to kind of double down. And it was like I was sleeping on people's couches. I was bouncing every single check I wrote.
It was
say that.
Yeah, it was a hard time, I'm sure. In terms of what you've built, if it's something that's as near and dear to your heart as this, it has to be extremely emotional for you to see the kind of ridiculous restrictions that are being put in place right now that are crushing your industry, I feel like, more than almost any other.
Yeah, it is. It is personal, right? It's like family. So you've got the brand, and since this brand was built out of, I didn't sit around a board table with a bunch of private equity guys and try and figure out what the next big thing was going to be. This brand was built out of my visceral, right? This was my baby, and then we still have employees that started with us in 2011 that have worked with us all along. I mean, we've got a family that's associated with this brand in Southern California, literally and figuratively. So when we see that we're getting targeted and effectively scapegoated as the bad guy. And I think the timing of us talking is really interesting because it's been about 3 weeks now that restaurants have been shut down. And all we hear about today, the morning I wake up, is this outrageous spike in cases, hospitals overflowing, et cetera. And yet the narrative is still shut down restaurants, right? We've been shut down. We're not the culprit.
Yeah. In New York, obviously, they have this contact tracing program that you can use to find out where people are actually getting this virus and where, sort of the culprits lie. And obviously, that was a number that people really fought hard to get. It turns out it's less than 1.5% in terms of the contact tracing. And that's something that I know infuriates a lot of my friends who are in New York. They feel this is just, ridiculous. They see the neighborhood restaurants that they know and love, that their families have gone to on holidays and special events over the years, struggling so much to stay afloat. And they're furious. What is it like in California? And is there any kind of recognition in a state that prides itself on, an economy that is built on advances in science, Silicon Valley, the tech community, people valuing science and data as opposed to some kind of, emotional pursuit? Why is it that they won't pay attention to things like that?
Well, I think Silicon Valley is focused on a couple other things right now, and first and foremost, it's making money, and it's trying to figure out where they can obviously park enough of their money and continue riding the wave in the midst of the pandemic. And I'm not saying that to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but if you look at the areas in which they've made money through this pandemic, it's obviously areas where they've just squeezed small businesses. And I'll use third-party delivery apps as a prime example. DoorDash is going public on, the valuation is absolutely through the roof. They've never made money ever. They've never been profitable. It's the antithesis of restaurants, right? Because we try and sell ourselves and establish valuations, and it's like, well, you've never made money, so you're worth pennies on the dollar. So when you look at what Silicon Valley, it seems as if they're working in tandem with our overlords, if you will, to try and kind of intentionally or unintentionally create what's happening right now is really a class warfare, whereby your big business, your campaign donors, your elites are operating in one bubble. And then you have all the small business retailers that are being told they have to shut down. Nobody is nobody is leading them. I can't even say the word. Nobody is leading them through this and saying, don't worry, we're going to get your back, or here's some sort of financial relief. I mean, I equivocate it to like eminent domain. It's just the government coming in and saying, we're going to build a highway here. Here's money for your house. By the way, your house is going to get buried. Now imagine that scenario where they said, we're going to build a highway here. Here's no money for your house. See you later. That's what's happening to us.
Why do you think that we are living in this moment in which we have so many things that are valuable to us within the community, namely, small chains and local restaurants, neighborhood institutions, things that have been close to us? Why are they in such a situation where they don't have the kind of access to funds that they really deserve, given their importance to the community, in comparison to some of these larger chains that have leaned so much on their ability to say, we're going to lobby the hell out of the federal government to get bailouts and the like?
Well, I mean, you kind of answered the question right there. It's because they've been lobbying the federal government, and now they are the protected class of businesses because of the partnership. They're the brothers, the sisters, the cousins of the government agencies that are insulated in the midst of this pandemic. We are on the outside of that bubble as small businesses, medium-sized businesses as well. We're on the outside of that bubble, and we're not eating off of the grand buffet, if you will. Instead, we're left to fight over the scraps that they throw over the wall. It's not a matter of if we survive, it's a matter of how long we survive and when we all just, end up buried, unfortunately, in a business sense.
What was the first thing that you did after kind of the initial lockdown period? Did you shift to doing something different? in terms of trying to provide food or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, right from day one, right? So when we knew this was coming and then the lockdowns landed, it was like 2 days of us being closed. We realized that we had to let people go. We wanted to do that as quickly as possible. But because we had a little bit of cash on hand. So we wanted to be able to distribute that to our employees to make sure that they felt comfortable knowing they had a bridge. And then myself, my wife, my kids, people who were part of our bubble were like, look, we'll work for free. Everybody kind of contributed on their own. I mean, it was like, immediately people went into survival mode in this small business realm. It wasn't, oh, what's the government going to do for me? I'm going to sit back and watch Netflix, right? Like we all just kind of jumped in. And then what we started doing was, number one, we had perishable inventory. We cooked it all. We let everybody take it. We let everybody enjoy, the bounty of our food while they didn't know what was happening to them. That was about a week's worth of supply and food for all of our teammates. And then from there, it was, okay, how are we going to be able to continue surviving throughout the pandemic? But most importantly, at that point, when it was 15 days to slow the spread, we really wanted to be a team player in all of this. So it was, okay, well, what can we do as a business to remain ahead of the science so that we can open eventually, we don't know when at that point, and safely operate within a framework that we can continue to stimulate our own local economy while not creating a risky situation. So, I had to become a proxy epidemiologist and try and understand what we could do to rebuild the restaurant in such a way where we could do that, right? So, plexiglass, masks, etc. It's funny, we break down a lot of seafood in our restaurants. So we actually had a ton of masks because we would always wear masks when we break down the seafood. I won't get into the nitty gritty about that, but
No, I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. So keep going.
So like we were going out, I was putting messaging out, swing by the restaurant, everybody, we've got masks, we'll distribute them, because that was that time frame when you couldn't get a mask anywhere. And it was ironic because that was also the time frame where the talking point was, you don't need to wear masks. Do not wear masks. That'd be so silly. Now we can go back and we can check out those receipts, if you will. And it's like it was never said. So we were working to help everybody out, even if it cost us a little bit of money.
I will eventually get to food, but in terms of your experience then, as you moved out of that period, and as it became apparent that these rules and regulations, they were going to be, vague or shifting or not necessarily tied to actual science, what was the point where you started to get really frustrated with what you were seeing?
I think that my tipping point was the 4th of July, right? So the one thing that's always been an absolute is how healthy it is to be outdoors throughout this pandemic. And that's across the board, no matter who you ask.
Totally.
Going into the 4th of July. Now, of course, in here, just so you understand the kind of political geography of Southern California, Orange County is a little bit more conservative. Obviously, Sacramento, incredibly liberal. Orange County started to skirt some of the regulations, which triggered Newsom. He started targeting Orange County. There was a lawsuit where Orange County sued the administration. What was his first reaction? Shut down the beaches in Orange County. So he starts shutting down the beaches in Orange County, which was absolutely absurd. He'd done that once. He reopened them. Going into the 4th of July, this is the time of year when restaurants along the coast, it's our Black Friday, right? We go from red to black. It's where we make our money. So I remember it was a Tuesday, and we bought all of our inventory. I put all my staff on the schedule. This is the time to give everybody hours, right? We can do overtime, et cetera, et cetera. Ready for a big weekend. The Wednesday going into 4th of July weekend, mind you, we've gotten our inventory now and it's perishable inventory. Newsom shuts down the beaches in Southern California because he claims that if the beaches are open, you remember all those pictures that were going viral of the crowded beaches, which
especially the ones with the lenses that sort of made people seem closer together than they were. Yes.
The optical illusions.
Yeah.
I could find Waldo there. It wasn't that difficult. He shuts down the beaches. All right. People start canceling their trips to the beach. We were dead that week because all the beaches were shut down. And I said it at the time. I said, you know what people are going to do? They're going to have backyard parties. They're going to have house parties. They're going to be roaming around the streets of Orange County. And what happens? That's 2 weeks later, crazy spikes in cases. We lose all of our inventory. I paid all of my employees for the projected hours, but that was a loss for us. What does he do? He reopens the beaches Monday morning. Absurdity. Absolute absurdity. He's not following the science, not following the data, and that the unintended consequence or the he probably didn't care. The callous consequence was that cases went up because of that move.
Mm-hmm. It's something that we've seen time and again, where we have this paranoia about outdoor activities, when we know over and over again that it's these indoor lockdowns that drive people to do the in-home stuff that would be much safer if they were sitting at a picnic table outdoors, enjoying some good seafood. So you have obviously become a more prominent voice on these issues. And in fact, when I was asking people for suggestions about questions for you, more than one of them asked me if Governor Newsom is recalled, if you will consider running for governor.
Well, I have, it's been a flippant response. Actually, I think I said it on Fox and Friends the other morning that I would do so. And look, it's not off the table. I'll put it to you this way: definitely registering. Now, do I think that I could ever get enough votes to be the governor? Of course not. But do I think that I could perhaps be a reasonable voice from a small business owner who could cut against the grain of the system that's been creating all of these problems? Perhaps, yeah. And I also don't have a filter, so maybe we need that in California.
I've met now Governor Newsom a number of times before he became governor. I don't think he's a dumb guy. He comes across as a little slimy, sort of used car salesman kind of thing, but obviously with the glow up of just being very, very primped and prodded in terms of his appearance. But I don't think he's a stupid person. Why do you think that he rejects the science so much? Is it just going with the flow of political pressure? What's really behind the decision process from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think he rejects the science. That's why he's going out to eat. And that's why he's taking theoretical risks himself, because he recognizes that the science proves it is safe for him. What he's doing is that he's posturing and he's a political actor. And that might have taken over. Somebody asked me the other day, they said, I've asked me about my feelings about Newsom. And look, I've read up on the guy. He had a heck of an upbringing. He had a tough upbringing as a kid with single parents. He was a hard worker, him and his sister. I mean, he's got a heck of a story. He's an incredible speaker. He's got a wonderful head of hair. He's done some amazing things. And I never anticipated my original video where I called him an a-hole would go viral. And to some degree, I would take that back, because if I sat down with him, I wouldn't say that. And I would hold him to the level of respect that he deserves. But what's happening right now is that I think that he's acting. And when people ask him in these press conferences, I just saw one a day ago, they say, what's your response to the fact that small businesses are being targeted and gutted and wiped out? Instead of him leading, as I had said, we're going to help these small businesses, and telling his own story. I was a small business owner. I get it. We need to lead. We're going to help them out. He says, look at all the deaths, right? It's the fear mongering. And that's a political move. I mean, it's almost like he's getting his talking points from Pelosi or Schumer or anyone else who's just spinning this tale.
Well, part of the problem from my perspective is that he's someone with national ambitions. And because of that, I feel like he's catering to a national audience as opposed to looking to the priorities of the state. And I think that is true, by the way, of both right and left politicians. In that if you look across the country, a lot of these governors who have national ambitions, they're more mindful about what's being said about them in those, primarily New York-based publications and cable news stations than maybe they are about, look, let's look at the evidence on the ground. And I think, unfortunately, in the case of California, it's sad to say, they've followed this whole lockdown strategy to the nth degree. And the upshot is that they look worse than most of the rest of the country in so many different measures. I mean, they're not as bad as New York and New Jersey, obviously, not as bad as Michigan. But, in terms of the comparison between the state of Florida and the state of California, it's no contest in terms of who's been able to handle this better. I do wonder if at some point it gets to be too much for him and he just sort of pulls away from this, because he just seems to keep doubling down on this approach. And I have to think that even if you are a left of center Californian who's generally been supportive of him, at some point the tolerance has to run out, and you have to just be so frustrated that you have to say, come on, we got to change the way we're doing things. Do you think that point is possible, or is the state just too politically, ideologically aligned with his own side of things to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point you make. And let me just say, let me back up to your first point, because I agree with you 100%. What's driving these decisions? I don't firmly believe that there's some grand conspiracy whereby people are trying to press the big reset button. I don't think our elected officials are really thinking that far beyond themselves. Okay. And Newsom is an intelligent guy, as you said, but I don't think a lot of our elected officials are intelligent enough to be able to secretly collude over such a grand plan. What I do think is that all of their decisions are driven by ego, and it's driven by ambition, right? So what they want to do is they want to pat themselves on the back by saying, I've made the tough decision. Do you know how hard it is to make these tough decisions? I've had to wipe out this small industry at the expense of my own economy and my own tax base and my own tax revenue, so that then they can walk around with their other politician buddies and say, look at what I did. I made the tough decisions. And then market that as such so that they can move forward within their political ambitions, as you mentioned. So that's what I think is driving a lot of these decisions. And unfortunately, that's the reality. It's a level of psychological egoism whereby we can't always see beyond our own ambition. Now, when it comes to Newsom retracting on some of his moves, I think he's gone too far, right? So I think he's already now driven 70% of the way in the wrong direction. And instead of turning around, he's going to try and figure out a way to get to the end goal, even if he has to drive through a forest or a house to get there, right? If he has to off-road a little bit. So when, for example, in San Diego, the judge came out and said, you know what, we're allowing restaurants to open. I said immediately, I said, look, I know we can all run around and we can clap about this. There's going to be a retaliation. This is not going to be accepted by the system. And when you ask about the other kind of liberal elites in California egging him on, I do think that's happening, but I also think reasonable minds have opened up here in California, which is why the recall effort is gaining a lot more traction than I anticipated it would, because I think even those on the left, right, recognize that this hypocrisy is forcing people to defy all of the rules, right? And as a kid who was a delinquent growing up, if I already knew I had a detention for one thing, well, who cares? Then I'm going to do everything wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if I, as a restaurant owner, am going to get fined because I've opened up outdoor dining and I don't believe the science proves outdoor dining should be closed, well, then hell, I'm going to open indoor dining too. And that's what we saw happen. And look, we haven't opened indoor dining. I don't necessarily believe that opening indoor dining in a state where you can have outdoor dining is the right move, because science does prove that these indoor situations for long periods of time can create spikes. So that's what I'm talking about with these unintended consequences. And people are also now just saying, well, the heck with it if I'm breaking a rule. When you overextend on these rules, then it forces people to not follow any of them. There needs to be a reasonable measure.
So talk to me a little bit about your own industry. I'm sure that as someone who is within it, that you have restaurants and places that you love, places that you've gone to before and that you have a connection with. What have you lost during this period that you fear won't come back and that you feel is really a deep loss in your heart?
Well, for me personally, my wife and I have a few separate concepts outside of our multi-unit Slapfish restaurant group, and we invested all of our savings, 100% of it, into two of those, and we've had to completely shut them down. So we've lost all of our money there, everything. The rest of our money is invested in Slapfish, and we've also had to shut down a few locations with Slapfish, and our franchise system is depressed financially. So we're scared. Look, we are personally incredibly scared through this. My outspoken nature through all of this has certainly gotten me canceled across some of these other projects. So, you know, I put myself in the crosshairs, and I'm going to suffer from that, but I think it's the right thing to do. In regards to the restaurant industry as a whole, what we've seen across the fine dining, the bar, the community restaurant landscape is a complete and utter destruction of so many restaurants that have been cornerstones to every single community. And I mean, we target these, right? I mean, everyone loves diners, drive-ins, and dives. This is the heartbeat of America when it comes to food. At the end of the day, people would much rather go to some of these hole in the walls than they would to a Blue Water Grill or a Morton's. You know, those are anniversary experiences that I don't want to put those down either. Those are phenomenal restaurants, but what we've lost is culture. Food is culture. Food is the common denominator. And we've completely lost that culture. And we're going to be left, as they said in Demolition Man, with Taco Bell's on every single corner. And while that was complete hyperbole, it's actually becoming more truth than it was hyperbole now. And that's a scary prospect, an incredibly scary prospect.
That's actually what happened, by the way, to the theater system after the 1918 Spanish flu. They were mom and pops before, and then they kind of consolidated and they became chains. So it'd be interesting to see if that truly happens here again, and very sad. On a normal situation, you talked about that order that you put in for perishable food on anticipating 4th of July. What does that order look like, and how many people do you kind of touch in order to get that order through? Meaning, how many fishermen, how many boats, how many folks coming in are kind of trickled down, affected by the fact that you're ordering all of this to make it for people?
It's a great question. So our business model is we purchase our seafood as close to, if not directly, from the source, right? So that's working with local fishermen here off the coast of Southern California, but then also contracting with fishermen around the United States in well-known sustainable fisheries. So that, each one is different. We don't have a consolidated resource. So that's, 10 different fisheries, for example, all artisanal, mom and pop type fisheries in the fishery world, if you will. And then, of course, all of our service providers, from our produce across the board to our dry goods. And we have multiple service providers. We're not a single source restaurant where everything comes in from a Cisco or a US Foods. It's a lot of these smaller, kind of independent mom and pop service providers. In addition to the fact that it's also, it's the people that we contract. And that's something that I think is getting lost in this mix. The restaurant supply chain, if you will, it's integrated in so many different areas. If you want to call it kind of the biodynamic nature of the restaurant ecosystem, includes everything from, kids who are trying to start their own social media companies, tons of friends in that influencer space who have really built themselves as entrepreneurs, helping the restaurant community. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of people now that are out of work who have been driving this entrepreneurial spirit. And all of these people now, what are they doing? Well, they're going to have to go work for Amazon. They're going to have to go deliver for Postmates, Uber Eats. They're getting absorbed by the system. We pay our employees so much more than these big box stores. We provide a safety net for them that doesn't come from a human resource department. It comes from us. It comes from our heart. We're coming out of pocket for so many of these people, buying them cars, whatever we have to do. These are the soft relationships within these independent businesses that you cannot replicate on a grand scale. And we're going to really lose something culturally when that goes away.
I'm curious, what are your top selling dishes, and what do they look like? What's the sort of creativity or the inspiration that you took that go into them?
Our model is to take comfortable, well-known dishes that everybody kind of intellectually understands, to throw seafood in there and give it a little bit of a spin, make it something of our own. So one of our top dishes is like our lobster grilled cheese, right? So just a classic ooey gooey, drool-worthy grilled cheese, but it's packed with crab and lobster. We got a specific type of sourdough bread with a little bit of that acidity to cut through the richness of the cheese and the lobster, and it's just overwhelmingly buttery and rich and meltingly tender. And that's probably one of our number one sellers. We've got our chowder fries, all natural hand-cut fries, smothered in scratch-made clam chowder, topped with double smoked bacon and drizzled with some of our awesome sauce, which is just an acidic, sweet, smoky sauce. Once again, that was fashioned off of this idea of the poutine, right? Or disco fries. Are you on the East Coast right now?
I am, yes.
Okay, so if you've been to any diner in New York or New Jersey, late night disco fries or
yes,
or the garbage fries, that's exactly what that was fashioned off of. So using that model.
Did you come up with these in your own home kitchen? Like, is that where this kind of stuff came out of?
Yeah. My wife is also a chef. She's trained as a chef, culinary school. My kids are foodies. And I hate to use that word foodies. By foodies, I mean like they'll eat anything. And if they don't, we'll blend it up and make them drink it. But the funny story about the chowder fries, you'll actually appreciate this. It was like it was the first cold night in Southern California in November, and we had the food trucks. And I was doing an event at like the OC Fairground, and I said, shoot, I gotta have a soup here because it's supposed to rain tonight. Nobody's gonna come out. So I tweeted out, and this was when Twitter was like, meet us at this address. I tweeted out, I'm doing my scratch-made clam chowder. I'd worked at the Ritz-Carlton in Boston, and we had this phenomenal recipe there. So I tweaked it a little bit, did this New England style clam chowder. So I get there, I parked the truck, I got the chowder all made, and I see cars lining up, and I'm looking out, and there's a line of like 20 people, and I'm looking back in the kitchen, and we've got maybe chowder for 5. So I'm thinking to myself, how the heck do I string this chowder out? Well, being an Italian, it's always like beans on starch. So I said, oh, just start pouring it over the fries, right? Because now you're chunking it out.
Yep.
So I start pouring it over the fries and selling it as chowder fries. And there was like a food reporter in line that day, and they posted an article about it the next day. And from there on out, it was, I want these chowder fries. And that became our signature dish. It was almost serendipitous, right?
That's fantastic. So how accurate or how inaccurate is the movie Chef?
It's somewhat accurate. I think
What's the biggest problem with it?
I don't know. The biggest problem is what people don't realize is in these movies, chefs have a lot of free time, it seems like, in order to have social lives and emotions, etc. That's not the case. I mean, when you're really running a business and you're a chef, you wake up in the morning, you step out of bed, and you immediately run to start working. You go to bed at night at 1 a.m. Perhaps you drink a quick bottle of wine and fall asleep. That's it. That's your life.
I feel like that's definitely an element of a lot of these film depictions of it. In terms of where the industry goes from here, do you have any feeling of hopefulness or optimism that within the next couple of months, there's going to be a resurgence? And if so, what do you think that looks like? Do you think that a lot of these neighborhood places that have gone belly up will be able to come back? Or is it a situation where people have taken such a hard hit that we are going to see, as you said, those Taco Bells on every corner?
Unfortunately, those restaurants that have gone under, I don't necessarily think that there's any opportunity to get them back, because once a restaurant goes under, the inventory is sold just so that people can survive. The space is gutted out, hoods pulled out. You can't just put that back. And landlords aren't going to allow them to put that back. Landlords are not being too friendly through this process, and that's important to mention. But they're also not getting maybe the assistance that they need. I don't think any sector of the industry should really take the hit here. So sadly, I don't necessarily think some of those are going to come back. I've already seen them on market, and I've seen the big guys swooping them up. I know personally that a lot of these, big, equity groups and large restaurant groups are taking advantage of Chapter 11 process to then come in and take on some of this low-lying fruit, right? This penny on the dollar inventory. So we're already starting to see the landscape change. Only thing that I can hope is that there's a realistic relief plan that's put in place that does not get distilled through multiple government agencies. And I use the analogy of like a glass of milk. You wake up in the morning, if you want to have a glass of milk, you don't start with one glass, pour it into 10 glasses along the way, because by the time you get to that last glass, you've lost all your milk. It's stuck on the side of the glasses. Each one of those glasses is a government agency. What we've seen through this process is how much misappropriation and fraud there is in regards to money that starts off at the top and tries to distill down to consumers. So if we can get direct relief paychecks from the government, where does that money come from? Perhaps we actually tax some of these big box stores as opposed to giving them tax breaks as we've done over the past few years. But the restaurant industry needs to get help. And if we're going to get shut down, then shut it all down. I mean, shut everything down, because you can't shut one industry down and not another. And that's kind of the message that I've been heralding is that go ahead then, shut it all down, pay the restaurants, pay the people who are working in the restaurants, use the restaurants as a mechanism whereby you can continue feeding people at the cost of the government so that we're not overwhelming grocery stores, and everything else is shut down. But that'll never happen.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about this GoFundMe that you've got going.
So we started a GoFundMe account as a result of what I'm mentioning here is that there doesn't seem to be any government assistance for the restaurant workers, right? And I'm referring to the individual mother, father, son, daughter. These people are getting their hours cut or they're losing their jobs, and there's no help for them. And if you file for unemployment, especially in California, it could take you weeks to get your money if you get it at all. And we've recently seen about the amount of fraud. So when I kind of went viral with my original video, everyone was writing to me. They're like, we want to send you money for your restaurant. Well, I wasn't in it for a grift, right? This isn't the Andrew Gruel Lincoln Project. This was, for me, an opportunity to just get the word out. And then people kept communicating. I said, fine, let's start a fund where we can actually raise money for struggling restaurant workers. not tons of, we don't want to give these people $10,000. It's just even a couple $100 is enough to bridge people so that they can figure out their next move to relieve some of the stress. So we've raised money. Already we're up to $33,000 to $34,000, and we've only been running it for about a week. And we're distributing that money in denominations of no more than $500 to help struggling and out of work restaurant workers.
And people can find that on your Twitter at Chef Gruel
at Chef Gruel, on Andrew Gruel on Instagram. I'm posting it up all the time. So that'd be the best resource.
Well, I wish you good luck with all of this. I mean, it's an incredibly challenging time for your industry. I'm hopeful that that we'll be able to get through this, but I understand, and I think that, frankly, I think you're speaking for a lot of people who maybe haven't been able to speak or have been worried about the consequences of speaking, and so I applaud you for that. Thank you for taking the time to do it. It's very valuable.
Thank you.
I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.